The hallmark of slave patrolling was the belief that every facet of black life was suspect, warranting aggressive police intervention and criminal investigations. Planters and slaves understood that slave patrols, hunters, and their bloodhounds were the police with broad powers to protect whites from black insubordination and criminality. Doesn't that sound familiar? And this was back in the 1800s. I'll be back. Hello everyone, welcome back. Hope you have had a splendid day today. Thank you for subscribing, thank you for returning, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, like, comment, and share. It helps out a lot. The recent constant rash of police shootings of black people in their homes when they've called the slave patrol, aka police, for help has brought to mind this report I found over a year ago. The Justice Department, the report was about the Michael Brown case, what happened in Ferguson. It's amazing how a government agency can find police acted criminally, yet no one within that department was accountable or charged. Yet this country steadily screams, cries, moans, and complains about everyone else needing to be accountable. The most unaccountable people on the earth are the ones who demand that everyone else be accountable, except for them. Ask the victims of Tulsa, who's been accountable for destroying their entire thriving community. I'll wait. Although slavery had died, Southerners' demand for white domination and black subordination survived. Former slave Samuel Ward wrote that it was almost impossible to spend the greater part of one's life in slavery and escape its influence on one's character. Ward believed bondage showed itself in his thoughts, superstitions, and narrow views, concluding, the infernal impress is upon me, and I fear I shall transmit it to my children, and they to theirs. How deep-seated, how far-reaching a curse. He was confident that slavery's generational curse was also true for slaveholders. He said slave owners never lost the overbearing insolence, the reckless morals, and peculiarly inelegant manners, profligate habits, which distinguish too many of them. And I said that in so many ways. It's not just black folks that need to be delivered from the slave mentality. It's white people need to be delivered from the slave master mentality, thinking they still have a right to tell black folks what to do, and we supposed to just bow our heads and do it. You need to wake up. In 1864, white commentators anticipating Southern defeat and abolition understood the difficult challenges ahead. George W. Carleton concluded the suppressed book of slavery with, "Slavery is not dead yet. It is pretending to be dead, only that it may be let alone and rise again to do mischief. It has had hard knocks and is half dead. It would be madness not to kill the surviving half. We want peace, but not peace that will last only till our children shall grow up to partake of a legacy of blood and an inheritance of curses." That Richmond Examiner wrote, "It is all hallucination that we are ever going to get rid of slavery. It will be desirable to do so. It is righteous, profitable, and permanent, and belongs to Southern society as inherently, intrinsically, and durably as the white race itself." Southern men should act as if the Negress is here and here forever, is never to be emancipated. It is to keep hard at work and in rigid subjection all his days. The determination to impose a new regimen of white domination was unambiguously expressed by a pro-slavery clergyman proclaiming liberty for the white man, slavery for the Negress, as long as the white man is able to hold him. That sums it up. That sums up the mentality. The last statement, the last paragraph I just read sums up the mentality of white racist America. The report was published by a professor of history at Morehouse College, and it detailed the racialized police canine units, and it talked about the Justice Department published a report on Ferguson, Missouri Police Department, and is linking the slave origins of the Southern law enforcement with modern police department and police departments using canine dogs. So, I found the report over a year ago, but as I didn't want to get into it because it was like, you got so many people that know the police department is an extension of slave patrols, and then you have other people that act brain dead, like, oh my God, they don't see the correlation between police constantly hardcore surveying the black community. You know, it's the same thing they did on the plantations, the slave patrol. So anyway, but when I saw the case of what happened with the young lady who asked police for assistance and they ended up shooting her kitchen, it was like, okay, let me do this video. Okay, let's get into this. Troubling facts outlined in a 2015 United States Department of Justice report on the Ferguson, Missouri Police Department charged the police with unconstitutional practices but did not bring criminal charges for any of its findings, including the killing of Michael Brown. The police officer walked away from the human slaughter on the city's roadway without legal consequences. This pattern of judicial ambiguity is part of a complicit process of tacit support for extra-legal racial practices by Southern law enforcement. Through centuries of slavery, decades of segregation to the present, the black experience is rife with unresolved episodes of police violence. The nation has become accustomed to watching, condemning, and taking limited measures to correct unjustified police violence in the black community. Since Ferguson, other cities experienced similar waves of police brutality. Though all have not occurred in the South, it does not change the fact that the Ferguson Police Department has become quintessential model of slave patrol methods in the modern era. An analyst of the Ferguson uprising instructs observers to look beyond its deceptive, integrated suburban profile to its slave and segregated history that shaped its present and future. September the 5th, 2014, the U.S. Department of Justice began an investigation to determine whether Ferguson police were engaged in racial profiling and excessive use of force. The results released March the 4th, 2015 concluded that police routinely violated the constitutional rights of residents by discriminating against blacks and applying racial stereotypes in a pattern of practice of unlawful conduct. Now, when you hear that, when you hear a big, huge government agency that's supposed to be a watchdog over law enforcement admit that they found racist activities in a whole police department, those who want to deny the true root of the police department, what do you say? You still gonna keep denying it after hearing this and numerous reports that came with the same conclusion about the U.S. Police Department? Yeah, I'm gonna go find it. Let's continue. The use of dogs to police plantations and presently Ferguson black neighborhoods was a common thread running from slave patrolling to the modern police department. In enlightened circles, humans are never subjected to the ravages of bloodhounds. It is contrary to the sacredness of what it means to be human. The enabling rationale for subjecting enslaved blacks to canine violence was the prevailing idea of black inferiority, pseudo-humanity. The DOJR described the composition of the canine force and the police governed their deployment. Ferguson Police Department currently has 4 canines, each assigned to a particular canine officer. Under its policy, canines are to be used to locate and apprehend dangerous offenders. When offenders are hiding, estate's handlers will not allow their canine to engage a subject by biting if a lower level of force could reasonably be expected to control the suspect or allow for apprehension. It also permits the use of a canine, however, when any crime or just a felony or a violent crime has been committed. This permissiveness, combined with the absence of meaningful supervisory review and an apparent tendency to overstate the threat based on race, has resulted in avoidable dog bites to low-level offenders when other means of control were available. The DOJR cautiously concluded the dog attacks were racially motivated. It stated in every canine bite incident for which racial information is available, the DOJR cautiously concluded that the dog attacks were racially motivated. It stated in every canine bite incident for which racial information is available, the subject was African American. This disparity, in combination with the decision to deploy canines in circumstances with a seemingly low object threat, suggests that race may play an impermissible role in officers' decision to deploy canines. Some of them fools thought they was back on the plantation. That's the mentality they have. That's why you have some white people that will be honest and say that racism is ingrained in their souls. They can't help but to see us as slaves. Let's continue. I was just having that discussion with a loved one. I said, they don't see black folks as anything other than slaves. It might be hard to hear, but look at the actions. Look at the actions of 400 years of actions. Let's continue. The report offered an analysis of 3 canine incidents to support its case. The first examined an alleged home invasion that proved to be teenage boys playing hooky from school in an abandoned house. The police described the crime and arrest. In December 2011, 4 officers deployed a canine to bite an unarmed 14-year-old black American boy who was waiting in an abandoned house for his friends. They arrested one boy on the ground level. The only plausible offense was trespassing. The report stated that the dog located a second boy hiding in a closet. The officers saw the boy, 5'5" and 140 pounds, curled up in a ball hiding. The officer then deployed the dog, which bit the boy's arm, causing puncture wounds. The boy, later interviewed by the DOJ, gave a different view of the event. According to the boy, he never hid in a closet and never heard any police warnings. He was waiting for his friends in the vacant building where they went when they skipped school. When he heard footsteps, thinking his friends had arrived, he went to the stairs. He saw the dog and turned to run, but the dog quickly bit him on the ankle and then the thigh, causing him to fall to the floor. The dog was about to bite his face or neck, but instead got his left arm, which the boy had raised to protect himself. Ferguson officers struck him while he was on the ground, one of them putting a boot on the side of his head. He recalled the officers laughing about the incident afterward. The second case indicated a recurrent pattern of officers using a canine to extract a suspect hiding in a closed space. The DOJ investigators were apprehensive about the frequency with which this particular rationale used to justify dog bites. It provides cause for concern. Again, the only victims running or hiding in closed spaces were black, the report stated. In December 2012, a 16-year-old African-American boy suspected of stealing a car fled from an officer, jumped several fences, and ran into a vacant house. A canine officer arrived. The dog reportedly located the suspect hiding in a closet. Without providing a warning outside the closet, the officer opened the door and sent in the dog, which bit the suspect and dragged him out by the legs. This force appears objectively unreasonable. Under closer scrutiny, the police report stated the first officer on the scene deployed his ECW taser against the suspect 3 times as the suspect struggled with the dog, which was still biting him. The officer's reports provide minimal explanation why apprehension by dog bite was necessary. The pursuing officer claimed the suspect had reached into the front section of his waist area, but the report does not say that he relayed this information to the canine officer, and no weapon was found. The DOJR concluded, given a lack of a warning at the closet, the use of the dog and the ECW at the same time, and the application of the 3 ECW stuns is quick succession, their conduct raises the possibility that the force was applied in retaliation for leading officers on the chase. The third case involved a black man walking on the street, obviously trying to avoid any contact with a canine officer and his dog. He was stopped and frisked, a common police procedure for Ferguson black males. The event concluded with the following canine attack and arrest. November 2013, an officer deployed a canine to bite and detain a fleeing subject, even though the officer knew the suspect was unarmed. He deemed the black American male who was walking down the street suspicious because he appeared to walk away when he saw the officer. The officer stopped and frisked him, finding no weapons, ran his name for warrants. When the man heard the dispatcher say over the radio that he had outstanding warrants, the report does not specify whether the warrants were for failing to appear in municipal court or to pay old fines or something more serious. He ran. The officer followed and released his dog, which bit the man on both arms. The officer's supervisor found the force justified because the officer released the dogs fearing that the subject was armed, even though the officer had already determined the man was unarmed. Reports canine data supported the racist culture and climate that contributed to the circumstances of Michael Brown's death. Brown and the anonymous canine victims were considered less than human, thus subject to dehumanized treatment. The officers saw them not as true or white humans, but pseudo-humans. Unleashing vicious dogs on blacks confirmed their devalued status. These behaviors were not simply actions of prejudiced individuals, but protected institutional behavior permitted under the guise of lawful police policies that covertly supported white supremacist views. This philosophical condition in the police department enabled deliberate disregard of the inherent humanness of all people. The DOJ report highlighted Ferguson police practices that were classic slave patrolling and hunting behaviors. It concluded officers command dogs to apprehend by biting even when multiple officers are present. They make no attempt to slow situations down, creating time to resolve the situation with less force. The use of canines reflects a culture in which officers choose not to use skills and tactics that could resolve a situation without injuries and instead deploy tools and methods that are almost guaranteed to produce an injury of some type. We reviewed many incidents in which it appeared that Ferguson police used force to inflict punishment. Their use of canines is part of its pattern of excessive force in violation of the Fourth Amendment, and its use of dog bites only against Black Americans is evidence of discriminatory policing in violation of the 14th Amendment and other laws. The police canine supervisor and officers were anonymous and not charged with a crime. The canine victims remained out of the public eye and media spotlight. The canine violence story has not been told and brought before the nation. The media made obligatory comments on the report's canine investigation. The problem was the data news coverage did not have a historical context. In 1961, Martin Luther King wrote about an enduring truth that guided him in mobilizing people to join the movement to persuade the nation that racism was inherently evil. He said the world seldom believes the horror stories of history until they are documented via the mass media. This was the fate of Black Ferguson's encounters with the city canine forces. The victims did not have visual evidence of their experiences. In spite of the DOJR's inclusion of violent use of police dogs as routine law enforcement weapons, it failed to get the attention it deserved and quickly faded into history footnotes. It sure did, because I don't recall hearing about this report back when that happened with Michael Brown. They know what to put out in the media and they know what to hide. And like they always say about Black folks, if you want Black folks to, you want to keep the truth hidden from them, put it in the book. And they see it worked very well. Because fortunately, I'm the type of person that like I've said in a couple videos, I like researching, and it's been this way for years. But there are unfortunately some Black people who say they hate reading. When a person tell me, and it doesn't matter the color, but when a person tell me they hate reading, it sounds kind of similar to someone saying they hate water. And you don't have but one time to tell me and say you hate reading and you hate water. I'm just really not interested in having any kind of relationship with you at all, because I think it's the most, for you to be living on this earth saying you hate to read and your body is 70% water, to say you hate water, that's an ignorance that needs to be examined. Yeah. Okay, let's continue. 1704, the slave patrol system was an idea imported from Barbados to South Carolina and later all southern slaveholding colonies and states. Patrollers policed all movement and unsupervised activity through passes, detainments, interrogations, unrestrained search and seizures of slave quarters, legally sanctioned on-the-spot violent punishment for the slightest infringement of slave laws and customs. The use of Negro dogs to intimidate and control slaves, as well as pursue, punish, and recapture runaways, was also introduced from the West Indies. Patrollers carried out their duties on foot and horseback, both day and night, armed with guns, Negro whips, and, given the situation, bloodhounds. Now, after hearing that, I dare you say the police department wasn't derived primarily and solely to psychologically and physically keep Black folks in check and in chains and in cages. I dare you to say it. I learned this years ago, that the police department derived from slavery. The police department is built on slavery. That is why they treat Black folks the way they do. And I don't want to hear anything about, oh, well, what about the Black on Black crime? Yeah, let's talk about the white on white. If you want to point out the crimes and the violence in the Black community, let's point it out in the white community. And let's talk about the root of the violence. They learned it from you. And they're still learning it from you. And black folks, you're going to have to get out of this mindset of acting like you're still on a plantation when police come around. You have every right to question them, and you have every right to stand up for your rights and not be afraid of your life being taken from you. It's the fear that brings about what you fear. Let's continue. Stop acting like you're on a slave plantation. And these police officers, you better recognize you're not above the law and you're not gods. Stop treating people like you are a god. Some of these scary white folks might have you conditioned and thinking you're God, but you're not. It's the fear of black retribution that keeps the police in business. You fear black people retaliating, and that is why the police department came about. Keep lying to yourself if you want to. Let's go on. They addressed white concerns that blacks were the foremost threat to their way of life. Just said it. You were so afraid and so threatened that the seeds of what your ancestors planted and what you perpetuated is going to come through. But you know what? I think the retribution for your actions, your ancestors' actions in the past, and what you continue to perpetuate now, it's going to come in a way you least expect. Watch. Authorized by county courts, slave patrols scrutinize every aspect of black lives with the power to spontaneously met out corporal punishment. Don't they do that? Look at it in the past. Black movements and black power and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. Who do they watch the most in this country, around the world? Let's continue. They were first responders to threats and actual slave insurgencies. By proximity, slave patrollers were the closest armed defenders of the core principle of Southern race relations, white domination and black subordination. I will never be subjected to you. I don't even have that mindset, thank God. I don't have the mindset that you want people who look like me to bow down to you. I would never bow down to you. Let's go on. The hallmark in slave patrolling was the belief that every facet of black life was suspect, warranting aggressive police intervention and criminal investigations. Planters and slaves understood that slave patrols, hunters, and their bloodhounds were the police with broad powers to protect whites from black insubordination and criminality. Why did you have to bring about a police department? Why did you have to bring about the slave patrol? Why did you have to go when they ran away? Why, if they loved it, why did they run away? Even though they knew it was a possibility they'd get caught and be tortured by barbaric, soulless, moralist people. You see, it don't add up. I have documented proof that slaves gave the enslavers hell. Let's go on. In 1820, Missouri was carved out of the Louisiana Territory and a year later entered the Union as a slave state. With statehood came new laws regarding black people. In 1825, law prohibited a free Negro or mulatto to come into the state under any pretext whatever. The same year, the legislature also directed county courts to appoint patrols to visit Negro quarters and other places suspected of unlawful assembly of slaves. By what other group on this earth it was a law made against them to keep them from assembling, to keep them from coming together as a group? See the psychological mind F they did against black folks, and then you wonder why the black communities in the state, because that went through the bloodline. Let's continue. By 1845, these patrols had permission to administer from 10 to 20 lashes to slaves found strolling about from one plantation to another without a pass from his master, mistress, or overseer. Missouri slave patrols worked at least 12 hours per month, or as many hours as the court appointing it desired. Members received 25 cents per hour. Missouri patrols were charged to exert control over the slave community using fear and discretionary violence. In 1857, Missouri failed to pass legislation to limit means by which slaves might escape to freedom. However, it indicated increased concern about runaway slaves and willingness to take extreme measure to maintain control over his slaves. Just reading this irritates me. It irritates me that these fools thought they had a right to govern a person's soul. They weren't just trying to captivate you physically. They were trying to control your soul, your thinking. And no one on this earth has the right to control your soul or your thoughts. Let's go on. The portrayal of blacks as harmless and content with bondage was the creation of myth makers justifying the importation and exploitation of involuntary collaborators and extracting numerous or enormous wealth from Southern soil. Some whites refused to believe that captives hated slavery and would consistently find ways to resist its cruelty. One of the great paradoxes is how blacks could be so valued while simultaneously viewed as the most feared, threatening people in the American experience. The reason why they're the most feared and valued is because, like I keep saying, and I'm going to keep drilling it, when you've done something horribly wrong to a person for no reason, you going to tell me that you don't fear retaliation? You don't fear getting back what you gave out? Let's continue. Richard Lungman suggested 4 factors that lead to colonial and early communities organizing police forces. 1. Actual or perceived increase in crime. 2. Public insurrections or riots. 3. Public intoxication. 4. A need to control dangerous classes. Large slave populations at the bottom of the caste system were the primary rationale for designating blacks as inherently dangerous and criminal. Though it is innately human to resist total domination and barbaric treatment by others, slaves' aspirations to change their status and condition made them a threat to whites from every socio-economic class. Slave resistance was expressed in theft of crops, livestock, arson, poisoning, plotting, uprisings, and running away. They were ominous to white livelihoods and security and considered most dangerous in areas where they approach numerical majorities. So when we come against their made up, dark, fantastic world, fantasy that they create, then that's when we become dangerous and a threat and criminals. You were doing the ultimate crime, putting people in bondage, and then when they wanted to be free, and then when they had to steal to eat because you kept them dirt poor, they were criminals. See the mentality? Let's continue. Southern whites developed a collective conscious and political consensus to tightly control blacks within their midst, and they're still doing it today. Slave policing demanded accountability for every captive's whereabouts. A missing slave was cause for grave concern, often causing panic. They were scared. They were scared that slave was going to come back and do to them what they did to them or their family members. Let's go on. Fear insurrection made unauthorized blacks on roads or in the public square hazardous. Racial features made blacks visible, suspect, and vulnerable to slave patrollers looking to catch a negress out of his place without a pass. Just as blackness was the stigmatized identification of bondsmen, it also singled them out as suspects and criminals. Enslaved blacks' phenotype marked them as habitual dangerous class. requiring relentless supervision and policing to guarantee their submission. Now, I dare you say they still not happening. I dare you say white people don't still have that same effed up mentality. Let's go on. Missouri judge asserted color raises the presumption of slavery. Basil Hall recorded in his 1829 travel diary the following observation about Richmond, Virginia slave patrol. And walking around, my eyes were struck with the usual sight of a sentinel marching with his musket. My companion said, "Is it necessary to have a small guard always under arms?" It is the consequence of the nature of our colored population, but is done more as a preventive check than anything else. It keeps all thoughts of insurrection out of the heads of the slaves, and so gives confidence to those persons amongst us who may be timorous. But in reality, there is no cause for alarm. The blacks have become more and more sensible every day of their want of power. After further inquiry, Hall noted, I learned that there was in all these towns a vigorous and active police, whose rule is that no Negro, for example, is allowed to be out of doors after sunset without a written pass from his master explaining the nature of his errand. If during his absence from home he be found wandering from the proper line of his message, he is speedily taken up and corrected accordingly. This was written by Hall in 1829. Sally E. Hayden's slave patrol in the Carolinas and Virginia suggested that patrols consisted of members from all social classes. It was believed that since every citizen was at risk to slave crime and violence, patrol service was a collective responsibility to protect their families and property from criminal blacks seeking liberation from oppression. Do you hear that? How is someone seeking freedom from oppression a criminal? You see that? And don't you see that mentality today? You wanting to seek liberation from oppression makes you a criminal. That's a sick mentality. Ooh. Let's go on. It was their civic duty to use. It's like they knew what they were doing was wrong, but they still criminalized you. They knew that putting people in bondage and oppressing them and abusing them in every aspect that they could was wrong, but they still turned around and criminalized you. Let's go on. It was their civic duty to use without reservation appropriate violence against any slaves as part of their obligation to maintain black subordination. Hayden supported her cross-class consensus argument with an 1845 letter from James Henry Hammond from South Carolina, governor, to a visiting English abolitionist. With us, every citizen is concerned in the maintenance of order and in prompting honesty and industry among those of the lowest class who are our slaves, and our habitual vigilance renders standing armies, whether of soldiers or policemen, entirely unnecessary. Small guards in our cities and occasional patrollers in the country to ensure us a repose and security known nowhere else. Hammond's justification of all white serving as patrols was to assure black submission to white authority. In spite of Southerners' vigilance, they remain under a cloud of slave rebellion, aggressive resistance, and insolent responses to white domination. That's what I said. No matter what they have done, they cannot control us. Let's continue. In 1850, Henry Brant took flight to Canada and left this poignant reminder of why he ran away. It always appeared to me that I wanted to be free. No person ever taught me so. It came naturally into my mind. Finally, I saw that my case was pretty hard if I had to live all my lifetime subject to be driven about at the will of another. When I thought of it, I felt wrathy at the white man. At length, I said, this will not do. If I stay here, I shall kill somebody. I better go. I told you it's a natural. We were born to be free, not oppressed. And I don't know why these cartoonish-minded people thought that putting people in bondage, they were just going to just be submissive and just do what they wanted them to do. But then when they saw that our people weren't going to do what they wanted us to do, and they actually fought for their freedom and dignity, that's when they started to try to scare the hell out of them, beat them to death, torture them, abuse them, sexually abuse them, whatever they could do under the sun to subject us to them. It still didn't work. Let's go on. Fugitive slaves, the economic loss of valuable property, were the South's greatest law enforcement problem. Patrollers were expected to intercept runaways and limit pursuits to their beats and counties. Professional slave hunters perfected the business of tracking fugitives. Slave patrollers, hunters, and hounds were law enforcement fixtures, an indispensable part of the slave police system. Their importance to Southern culture can be best understood in their presence in antebellum newspapers, private diaries, and slaveholders' personal papers. Though Gentile classes saw slave hunters' sordid activities as beneath them out of the economic necessity, they invariably supported their work using bloodhounds to recapture fugitives. In white Southerners' minds, there would always be a need for aggressive slave patrolling to enforce the deeply ingrained values expressed by Alexander Hamilton Stephens, vice presidents of the Confederacy. This fool said, as a race, the African is inferior to the white man. Subordination to the white man is his normal condition. He is not his equal by nature, and cannot be made so by human laws or human institutions. The great truth, I repeat, upon which our system rests, is the inferiority of the black man. It is this way of thinking that has messed white folks up for life, I think. You're going to say God's creation is inferior to you. Who told you that? What right do you have on this earth to subject people to that wicked nonsense? I think it's your need to feel superior that makes you believe that people who don't look like you are inferior. But anyway, let's go on. Disobedience and unauthorized leave from plantations was forbidden. They were chattel and required mandatory accountability for their goings and comings. Slaves' unapproved absence changed their status to fugitives, resulting in dreadful consequences and punishment. Every slave policing function enforced total submission of slaves' attitudes, behavior, and movement to white authority. Fugitive slave laws included compensation for their return. Slave hunters were also known as bounty hunters. Depended on Negro dogs to catch runaways. Professional slave hunting was a response to patrollers' failure to intercept runaways on local roadways and environs. Hunters were permitted to track runaways across state lines. Patrollers could serve as slave hunters, and in some cases most likely did, but their duties as police paid more than bounty hunters. Solomon Northrop's 12 Years a Slave left a merged view of slave patrollers and hunters' duties. He wrote, patrollers whose business it is to seize and whip any slave they may find wandering from the plantation, ride on horseback, headed by a captain armed and accompanied by dogs. They have the right, either by law or by general consent, to inflict discretionary chastisement upon a black man caught beyond the boundaries of his master's estate without a pass, and even to shoot him if he attempts to escape. Each company has a certain distance to ride up and down the bayou. One slave fled before one of these companies, thinking he could reach his cabin before they could overtake him, but one of their dogs, a great ravenous hound, gripped him by the leg and held him fast. The patrollers whipped him severely. So They not only sick these ravenous, wild, ferocious dogs on them, they also whipped them too. Merciless. Ooh. Newspaper notices of slave hunting and training of bloodhounds illustrated Missouri's acceptance of the enterprise. Antebellum Missouri's professional use of Negro dogs was highlighted in a February 14, 1855 Lexington Democratic Advocate advertisement. Bloodhounds, I would respectfully inform the citizens of Missouri that I still have my negress dogs, and that they are in prime training and ready to attend to all calls of hunting and catching runaway negresses. If the negress has weapons, the charge will be made according to the difficulty had in taking him. I venture to suggest to any person having a negress runaway that the better plan is to send for the dogs forthwith. When the negress goes off, I can be found at home, except when professionally engaged in hunting with the dogs. Slaves never forgot what the patroller hunters and hounds were paid to do. Though patrollers and slave hunters were not synonymous, both often carried out their duties with hounds. Slave narratives did not distinguish between them. In every district, they had about 12 men they called patrollers. They ride up and down and round looking for negresses without passes. When slaves run away, they always put the bloodhounds on the tracks. They had the dogs trained to keep the teeth out you till they told them to bring them down. Then the dogs would go at your throat and they tear you to pieces too. After a slave was caught, he was brung home and put in chains. Damn, they had to did all that to the person and put him in chains. In the let's continue. In the 1930s, former slaves recorded their views of the difference between modern police officers and slave patrollers. Then the patrollers, they keep close watch on the poor negresses, so they have no chance to do anything or go anywhere. They just like the policemen, only worser, because they never let the negresses go anywhere without a pass from his master. If you wasn't in your proper place when the patrollers came, they lashed you till you was black and blue. That is for just being out without a pass. If the negress done anything worse, he was taken to jail. Slave accounts of battles with patrollers, hunters, and hounds were disposition, not insignificant tales about unabated crimes against humanities. Their memoirs include personal experience with slave hounds. It was important to them that future generations knew the terror and death inflicted by Negro dogs. Slave testimonies of the hunted experience confirmed the absurdity of suggestions that Ferguson's adoption of slave patrol canine methods should not be taken seriously. Henry Walden, former slave, remembered, "Them hounds would worry you and bite you and have you bloody as beef. They would tell you to stand still and put your hands over your privates. They would set them on you to see them bite you. 5 or 6 or 7 hounds." E.V. Heron reminded readers that slave hounds made no gender distinctions. One day, my mother got mad about something what happened at the big house, so she runned off. When she couldn't be found, they hunted her with dogs. Them dogs went right straight to the ditch where my mother was hid, and before the men could get to them, they had torn most of her clothes off and had bitten her all over. When they brought her in, she was a sight to see, all covered with blood and dirt. Archival evidence from slave owner and hunters support the sadistic nature of policing slaves, and in 1857, Louisiana hunter described how he recaptured runaways. "If I can catch a cussed runaway negress without killing him, very good. Though I generally let the hounds punish him a little and sometimes give him a load of squirrel shot. If mild measures like these do not suffice, I use harsher punishment. The moment the hounds come close, they utter a hideous and mournful hound. Heaven pity the poor niggers. Wow. Contrary to pro-slavery arguments that abolitionists exaggerated the savagery of slave hunting, a Louisiana slaveholder wrote in his diary the results of the grotesque business. Hunting Williams' runaway caught him. Dogs nearly ate his legs off, near killing him. The physical damage inflicted by slave hounds left permanent scars. Evidence of the blood sport became identification marks to fugitive advertisements. In an 1837 newspaper, a couple of runaways were identified by wounds from prior canine violence. Bill has a scar over one eye, also one on his leg, from the bite of a dog. And Isham has a scar upon the breast and upon the under lip from the bite of a dog. Public notices of marketing and professional availability of slave hounds were common. A survey of antebellum newspapers regularly contained advertisements for Negro dogs. The market for the beast was without want of animals and customers. A year before secession, Alabama hunters were doing a brisk business selling slave hounds. The October 3rd, 1860 Somerville Weekly Democrat printed the following: I have a splendid pack of Negro dogs. The South cannot excel them. Part of them I purchased of C.A. Grant of Lawrence County, Alabama. If any person wants to buy a pack of good Negro dogs, I can suit them. I will sell at a bargain, or if any person wants me to hunt with them, my price is $5 per day, and all expenses paid and all rewards. I charge $10 if I catch him in his own county. If I catch him out of his own county, I charge $25. Negro dogs were a standard slave policing resource. Antebellum accounts of hunting humans with dogs are dissimilar to the Ferguson case only by the degree to which the animals were allowed to inflict damage. Hunting blacks was never a persecutable crime. It remains an inhuman police tactic and should be resolutely condemned as criminal conduct. During the Civil War, slave hounds joined their rebel handlers in military campaigns against Yankee aggression. Their use as war dogs temporarily changed Northern perception of their threat to not only slaves but all humans. Civil War, abolition, and packs of Negro dogs on the eve of the Civil War and emancipation, slave patrols were summarily reauthorized. Edward Cantwell's The Practice of Law in North Carolina, 1860, provided a template for patrols across the South. It described their normative, violent, and suppressive duties. The patrol shall visit the Negro house in their respective districts as often as may be necessary, and may inflict a punishment not exceeding 15 lashes on all slaves. They may fine off their owners' plantations without a proper permit or pass, designating the place or places to which the slaves have leave to go. The patrol shall also visit all suspected places and suppress all unlawful collections of slaves, shall be diligenting apprehending all runaway Negroes in their respective districts, shall be vigilant and endeavor to detect all theft and bring the perpetrators to justice, and also all persons guilty of trading with slaves. And if upon taking up a slave and chastening him as herein directed, he shall behave insolently, they may inflict further punishment for his misconduct not exceeding 39 lashes. Here's the thing. They gave these idiots the power to determine or lie and say that someone was resisting arrest, which gave them permission to beat them senseless or kill them. And they're still doing it today with the police department. During the war, slaveholding remained legal and required slave law enforcement. Slaves abandoning plantations and fleeing to Union troops were an unmanageable problem for slave owners fighting in the rebel army. Slave patrollers and hunters, if not conscripted, were unable to stem the tide of fugitives. Hunters and hounds did what they could to return fugitives, but the war made their task more difficult. Yet, while seeking freedom, the flying slave was always mindful of the threat of slave hounds on his or her trail. The traditional black response to flesh-eating dogs was fight or flight. Unarmed runaways were no match for the hungry hounds and armed hunters. In desperation, fugitives climbed tall trees, seeking sanctuary from the hellhounds below, usually to no avail. The last resort was to die fighting with their fists, hoping to kill the beast. During the war, white Union soldiers were introduced to slave hounds as formidable rebel combats. A Union officer recorded in his camp diary, Old Uncle Cattle's, a story of his flight to freedom. He wrote, "When I came upon the campfire, Cato had just come unexpectedly upon the plantation house and put in a bold face. I walked up to the door. Then I go up to the white man, very humble, and say, would he please give old man a mouthful for eat? He say he must have $50. Then I looked very sorry and turned to go away. Then he said, hey, I might give him that hatchet I had. Then I said that I must have that hatchet for defend myself from the dogs." In 1862, a field officer reported that while on a scouting expedition in rebel territory, the silence was often broken by the occasional yelping of a dog. As we passed the hut of some cracker, he further commented that the howling hounds always made him uneasy because dogs were the detective officers of slavery police. Within months, his discomfort was justified when the Confederate generals enlisted Negro dogs to attack newly mustered black troops fighting for black liberation. The rebels declared black soldiers fugitive slaves in arms. Their requests for Negro dogs were based on the belief that when black soldiers heard the howls and saw the charging hounds, they dropped their weapons and run. The theory was tested on October 23, 1862, at the Battle of Pocataligo Bridge between the 1st South Carolina Colored Regiment and rebel cavalry equipped with slave hounds. The field report stated the regiment captured and brought away all the slaves at the plantation, the operation being entirely without the presence of any white man. The whole command was attacked on the return by a rebel force, which was called a dog company, consisting of mounted riflemen and half a dozen trained bloodhounds. The men met these dogs with bayonets, killed 4 or 5 of their old tormentors with great relish. These allies were not originally intended as dogs of war, but simply to detect fugitive slaves, and the men were delighted at this confirmation of their tales of dog companies some officers had always believed. In 1864, a black soldier wrote a poem to his wife captioning the Frank Leslie illustrated drawing about the battle between the colored regiment and the hated hounds. We met the bloodhounds at the bridge. They ran with all their might. It was a glorious sight. We ran our bayonets through their backs. We shot them with the gun. It was all over with the dogs, and 'twas most glorious fun. In former days these brutes were used to hunt the flying slave. They tracked them through their dismal swamps and later quarter gave. But when they tried the game of war, we knocked them on the head. We shot them quick and ran them through until every hound was dead. Cattle and the black soldiers' instinctive response to dealing with slave hounds reflected Malcolm X's 1963 controversial retort to the non-violent response to Birmingham's police dog attacks on young protesters. If a dog is biting a black man, the black man should kill the dog, whether the dog is a police dog, a hound dog, or any kind of dog. If a dog is sick on a black man, when that black man is doing nothing but trying to take advantage of what the government says is supposed to be, then that black man should kill that dog, or any two-legged dog who sicks the dog on him. Malcolm's position on hostile racialized dogs was identical to the runaway and black soldiers' armed self-defense. I saw hounds at Andersonville. I saw one man who was torn on a leg by them. The hound keeper said, "Here are these Yankees capping." Then turning to us, worse said, "You young sons of bitches of Yankees, I'll make you smell hell before night." Trial of Henry Wise, 1868. In spite of a 150-year history of hunting slaves, the enterprise never reached the level of public acrimony requiring criminal prosecution until Confederates turned the hounds loose on unarmed northern white soldiers. The events were detailed in the September 1865 trial of Henry Wirz, commander of the Confederate prisoners of war camp at Andersonville, Georgia. Before sentencing Wirz to the gallows, the Chief Justice articulated his moral judgment of hunting humans. Henry Wirz did conspire with Wesley Turner, Benjamin Harris, hound keepers, and other citizens, and did keep and use ferocious and bloodthirsty dogs dangerous to human life, to hunt down prisoners of war, and did incite and encourage the dogs to seize, tear, mangle, and maim the bodies and limbs of the fugitive prisoners of war. He concluded with righteous indignation. It was clearly proved that a part of each pack were ferocious dogs, dangerous to life, so as to make it probable that the men on whose track they were sent would be killed. The instinct of the dog was for human blood, and to surrender to them was death. As applying to the question of criminal responsibility, the party using such means is to be held responsible for the consequences. At the trial, the authority of Andersonville canine victims' voice contributed to the guilty verdicts for the willful disregard of their fundamental human rights. Their disposition were honored by truthful and resulted in a conviction and the ultimate punishment. Henry Wirz was executed on November the 10th, 1865. My conclusion is there are an assortment of documents that prove the foundation of the police department, and now you completely understand, those who want to understand and those who want to see the truth. Now you understand why the police departments nationwide and worldwide deal so harshly and violently against people who look like me. Other than that, there are so many things that can be done to stop this police brutality against black folks and stop the brutality that black folks afflict upon themselves. It is an extension of slavery, whether people want to admit it or not. And the mentality that some of these white people have, racist, I'm gonna be specific, racist, the mentality that some of these racist white people have is an extension of slavery. But all things come to an end, so I don't really have too much of a conclusion. The research was said enough, said more than I can imagine, and it painted a very clear, precise picture of how black Americans have been treated. The police department has been directed from its creation to harass, hound, and inflict physical, psychological damage upon black folks. Like I said, everything comes to an end, and I'm so glad that God made me who I am, because I wouldn't look forward to reaping the seeds that, you know, is going to come upon a lot of groups who aided and abetting and oppressing a group of people who have been oppressed for hundreds of years. That's all I have to say. I'm about to close up shop. Thank you for subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing this video and other videos on this channel. Peace out.